Good afternoon, boys and girls, and welcome to Mr. D's health lesson. Say hi to Mr. Bones here. We have been talking a lot about bones and muscles and maybe a little bit about joints throughout these instructional videos, so I thought, how cool would it be if I could teach you guys a little bit about the bones and the joints of the body. Now, in our skeletal system here, there are a total of 206 bones. That's a lot of bones, and that's pretty impressive if you already knew that. But if you didn't, now you can go impress your parents and your siblings and even your friends that you know that little tidbit of information. We're going to start from the cranium, which is your head, and work our way down the body with our bones and our joints. Now, we're not going to touch on the spine or your backbone or the ribs. We all know where those are, or the neck. We are just going to touch on the main bones of the arms and the legs, for example. So, the first bone that we are going to learn is this bone right here. This is a longish bone, it's narrow, and this bone is called the clavicle or the collarbone. This bone connects to what is called the acromion, which is right here, which is part of our shoulder blade, which is right there. Now, I'm not going to tell you the technical term for the shoulder blade because I have some homework for you. I want you to Google or ask somebody what the name of that bone is, and I want you to comment or somehow get in touch with us PE teachers and let us know if you figured that one out. You never know, a surprise might be on your way. So I want to know what that shoulder blade bone is technically called. What is the terminology? The big bone in your arm here is called the humerus. Now, a funny story about the humerus, if anybody has ever bonked their elbow off something and it hurts really, really bad, and everybody's laughing, but you're not laughing because you're in pain, what you did is you just knocked your elbow, which is the base of your humerus, up against something. That's also called the funny bone. Now, what's connecting to the funny bone, or the humerus, is something called the ulna and the radius. Now, if you look at the skeleton, you see the thumb here and this bone. This is the radius, which makes this bone here the ulna. Now, something really cool about these two bones is it works and acts a little bit different. My hand and my arm here is doing the same thing as this arm right here. But when I flip it over, those bones actually roll over each other and they create an X. So my radius is actually coming across this way and my ulna is coming across that way. Now that is called a pivot joint, which just basically means the bones can roll over one another. So that's pretty cool about the joint there. Now, our elbow joint that connects the humerus to the ulna and the radius, that is called a hinge joint. Now, a hinge joint essentially can go 180 degrees, which makes it a flat line. Flat line to another flat line. Now, as you see with my arm and all of your arms, that is not completely factual. It will not ever get up to 180 degrees unless you have really good flexibility in your elbow or in your knee, for example, because the knee is also a hinge joint. But that is a hinge joint. We will get to the other joint, which is called a ball and socket joint, in a moment when we get down to the pelvic girdle, which is basically your hips, and this really long bone right here. This long bone, which is in your thigh, which is right here, is the most dense, and the thickest, and it's also the most painful bone if you happen to break it. Now, here's another little trivia question. I'm not going to tell you what this bone is called, but let's see, boys and girls, if you can tell the PE teachers, so let us know when you figure it out. But the head of this long bone in your thigh goes into the pelvic girdle or into the hip, and it creates a ball and socket joint. Now, a ball and socket joint is also up in your shoulders, and a ball and socket joint is supposed to allow for 360 degrees of motion. Notice how I can almost do a complete circle. Now again, that's not going to be true for everybody unless you have really flexible hips or really flexible shoulders. But those three joints, the ball and socket for 360 degrees, the hinge for 180, and the pivot joint, which is the rollover joint, are just three joints in the body that now you can learn. Now, as we make our way down to the end of this lesson, we learn about the lower portion of our leg, or the calf. Now, this bone right here, the kneecap, is also called the patella, which is considered a floating bone. Does anybody know what a floating bone is, boys and girls? I didn't know it until I went to college. But a floating bone is not attached to anything. If you move around your kneecap when your leg is nice and loose, you can see it kind of just moves around. That just means that it is floating there. There is some connection with it, but it's just considered a floating bone. Down here in our calf, we have our tibia, which is the thick bone in the front of our calf. You can feel that if you palpate it. Palpate means feeling and touching. You can feel the tibia as you move your hand up and down your calf. And then you have your fibula, which goes along the outside of it. Now our ankle right here, if you can see that, that is the base of your fibula, right there. So, that in a gist is some of the 206 bones in the body, some of the more important bones, some of the bones that you're going to learn a lot about throughout your time in school. Did you notice when you were looking at this picture that the arm and the leg look a little bit similar? They have similar joints, and they have one long bone at the top and two long bones that are a little bit more narrow as well. So both of those parts of your body, your arms and your legs, have similar structure to them. So, in review, our homework. What is this bone? Long, thick bone, very dense in your thigh. And what is the shoulder blade? We've talked about our thigh bones. We have talked about the shoulder blade in our fitness assessment video. Let us know what you think and enjoy this lesson about bones. Bye, guys.